Well, welcome to our next conversation, our LEAP conversation. Remember, LEAP stands for learning from each other, encouraging each other, being more acquainted with each other, and knowing how to pray for each other. So that's our goal here. And so we have six of us who have gathered here today for this conversation, and really grateful that we can see. Well, we see everyone except Scott. So sorry about that, Scott. You
No
know,
problem.
so you'll have to really interject if you want to say something, because we can't see it, but we do want to, we do want to hear from you. So yeah, so it's good to have everyone here. So most everyone here is, let's see here. So Dave, Scott, Josh, and myself are all pastors in the WRBC. Steve is the Bishop Apostle of the WRBC, otherwise known as the State Shepherd. And we have Dave Lingle here. So remind people, Dave, who you work for, and it's always good to have you at our events and things like that. So tell us a little bit about who you work for.
So I'm sure you all know, but Wisconsin Family Council. So I serve as church ambassador. So I just have the wonderful privilege of representing WFC in our work to the pastors and churches in our state. And our more recent initiative is working to facilitate connecting pastors with their legislators, to pray with them and for them, and really to develop what we like to call authentic redemptive relationships with them. It's not about policy or politics, but about recognizing that they're people that need the Lord or need the encouragement of the Lord's people. And so that's just a little bit about me and what we're doing these days.
Very cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm glad you can take part of this conversation with us here today. So one of the things I want to start with is, the subject of leadership has fascinated me for several years. And, one is that I don't think I'm naturally a leader, which may be surprising in some ways, given the roles that I've found myself in. I really feel like leadership is a learned thing for me. I remember my mom being pretty exasperated with me when I was a junior higher and just saying, stop being a follower, Jeremy, lead, and stuff like that. So that kind of set me on a course of studying leadership. And so there's different principles that I've come across and I like to share or think through and stuff like that. What leadership principles have you found most helpful in your context? And all of us have been leaders in one context or another. What are some leadership principles? It could be directly rooted to a Bible verse, or it could be just kind of a real practical life lesson that maybe you picked up along the way. So leadership principles here. So I can just pick on someone, randomly here. Or does anyone have anyone that you're like, yeah, this comes to mind right away? Any thoughts on that before I put someone on the spot?
Well, I'll jump in if that's okay.
Yeah.
We just embarked at our church on a study of pastors and deacons, and we're working through a book as pastoral staff and deacons. And one of the topics that was touched on in our meeting last Saturday was the issue of humility. And so I'll tell an embarrassing story, but a number of years ago, because I've always struggled with getting up in front of people, right? And a number of years ago, Pastor Lincoln preached. It was a Sunday morning message. I really, honestly, I don't remember what he was preaching about. It had nothing to do with pride or humility. But I remember during the invitation time, it was like the Lord was convicting me about pride. Mm-hmm. And I'm standing there, in the pew singing the invitation song, and I think I'm not a proud person. Okay. Honestly, that was my thought, right? And almost as soon as I think it, it's like, no, you are a proud person. Why do you think you have trouble standing up in front of people? Because you're very concerned about what they think about you.
Yeah.
What is that, right? What is that? That's pride. And I just it was like this revelation and of something that should have been so obvious, especially at that point in my life. But it was very convicting. I just really had to do my best to humble myself before the Lord and admit that, yeah, this is a besetting sin, and I really need to acknowledge it and recognize it and name it for what it is. And since then, I have read a couple of really good books on humility. J.C. Mahaney has one on humility. There are some others out there that are really helpful studies on humility.
Yeah.
But I think for anybody in a leadership position, I think it's a real challenge it can be a real challenge to have humility, especially when your leadership comes under fire or attack. Because, hey, you are, we all, right? We want to do what's right. We want to do what's best. We try to make good decisions. We try to make biblical decisions that are that's funny, that are honoring to the Lord. And then when the attack or the criticism comes, it can be difficult to accept that graciously and in humility. I think one of the most powerful, and I've had to relearn some lessons in humility, but I think one of the most powerful statements for me had to be that statement. How do you respond? If you want to know if you have a servant's heart, just check how you respond when you're treated like a servant.
Right. Yeah.
And that that's a challenging thing. And so I think for all of us in leadership positions, it can be very challenging to not only be humble, but to demonstrate that humility in practical and tangible ways. And yet I think really the people who look to us for examples need to see that. They need to see that example of foot washing, if you will.
Yeah.
They need to see that, when you remember what Jesus gave up in coming to earth, Philippians 2, you guys know the passages as well or better than I do. What a powerful example of humility. The creator of the universe stooping to wash the dirty feet of disciples who didn't have enough sense to realize who he was and what he was doing. And yet he did that willingly and graciously.
Yeah.
And and then went to the cross on top of that, so
yeah.
Anyway, it's just I think when it comes to leadership, I don't think we can say too much about the need for biblical humility and having a servant's heart and looking for ways to grow that and develop that and to demonstrate that. So I guess that'll be my contribution.
Thanks. Yeah. So leaders, a good leader will intentionally try to foster humility. That's really good. Do you remember which book? What book are you guys reading right now on the deacon elder or pastoral, the deacon team?
It's downstairs in my library, so
fine. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
I'm pretty sure it was T.J. Mahaney, and the book was just titled Humility. Yeah. But there's another.
Yeah, there's a couple other books. That one I recommend, and Pleasing People by Lou Priolio, which is really good.
Good one. Yeah.
Ed Welch has a good book called When People Are Big and God Is Small. Those are top 3 books that I usually recommend on that subject, because as you, I had to read on that as well for similar reasons. It was probably 1 or 2 stanzas of "Just as I Am" that I had a similar thought as well, in conviction. So that's good, and that's actually a leadership principle. This kind of leads to a leadership principle that I talk about: is good leaders are readers. And there's humility tied to saying, I got to read, because you're saying, I don't know everything, and I need other people. People come in my office and sometimes they're like, "Oh man, you have a lot of books and everything." I'm like, "These are my tools. This I need help. I need help." So that's it. Someone else. So leadership principle that has been helpful to you, or that you picked up along the way and you thought, this is helpful.
I'll give it a whirl.
Go for it.
Okay. I was just glancing through 1 Timothy chapter 3, which are the principles of, or the qualifications, pastor and deacon. One thing that stood out, there's 2 places in there where he kind of says this is what you should be doing, like an action. That's have your household under submission and have a good testimony in the public. But all those other attributes that are described in there are attributes of meekness, being humble, self-controlled, not quickly reacting and responding. And the typical view of a leader in the world is that aggressive person who's out there, go, 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 get. And yet Jesus was quite the opposite of that. He spent time with individuals, and he sat and prayed. And so that's an interesting observation there. I found that listening not only to the people in the church, but listening to those who are teaching and leading, like your deacons and Sunday school teachers, and trying to understand who they are, where they're at, helps you lead if you know where people are. And then I grew up on a cattle ranch, and so I have some hands-on with working with animals, and there's that principle of the shepherd and the sheep. And one thing my dad and I found really quick working with cattle is, if you want them to go through a gate, if you get behind them and start whooping your hands and pushing, they just panic and scatter. And what you really have to do is incentivize them to go through the gate. And that may be a sweet sound, patience. It may be food on the other side. It may just be a little bit of reason why you don't want to be on this side. But it really worked so much better to draw them to where they need to be than to push them, which is often leading by example, speaking the truth in love. Those are principles that when people hear the word of God, if they'll have a good example and a good interpreter, they're going to want that. And that's the best way to get them where they need to go.
So draw people, don't drive people.
Yeah.
That's good. That's really good. That's helpful. That's good. And then there's also a tie-in from what you're saying to what Dave talked about earlier with the humility part of it. So very cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In fact, I teach leadership courses at my kids' school on Fridays, and the leadership principle that I'm going to go over tomorrow with a few of the classes is one of them is good leaders tend to lead with questions rather than statements. So we're in a meeting and we're trying to talk about things, instead of saying, "Hey, we need to do this," to say, "Okay, here's the problem. I have some thoughts on this. I'd love to hear what you're thinking on this." That I think that develops what you're talking about, the humility thing, but also then it's drawing people along with you rather than driving them. It's a lot slower process, but I think you get better buy-in in the long run.
Yeah.
Is that why we
go
ahead?
Go ahead.
I just thought it was interesting. You look back at Habakkuk, and God was going to deliver a message to him and to Israel. Habakkuk's big problem was he didn't like who was delivering the message.
Right.
And yet the message was still true. It was God's message, and he had to listen to that. So we can't even really pick and choose who we get the message from. So being a listener is not just a patient thing that you do when someone's sharing a prayer request. You might have to listen to those people who are criticizing you, critiquing you, judging you, whatever that is. There may be good information in there, even if we don't like the messenger.
Yeah, it's good. What were we going to say, Scott?
When you made the comment about asking questions, leading with a question instead of a statement, it works out great, except for when we're out with our wives trying to figure out where to go to supper, and we leave the question, where do you want to go? And all of a sudden, next thing you know, we're trying to get her to buy into the idea we came together, but obviously it doesn't always work that way. But I like I don't know which one you guys wrote about the and praying for our people and being informed and asking the questions. And I find that it speaks volumes to the people we're ministering to when we care enough to ask the questions, and we're praying for their growth. We're praying for them to develop. And it's not about wanting to be out in front of everybody. We want to get them involved in the church, but we want to help them grow. And we're just there to help facilitate that growth. And so that's one of the things when I look at it, I'm trying to instill in their minds that, I may be the one up front, but, I'm just placed here by God to try to help you grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's good. That's helpful. Yeah. Trying to get buy-in sometimes isn't always easy, things, but, and then there is a danger, because we don't want to just be manipulating people with questions either. You know what I'm saying? You want to be sincerely trying to get viewpoints, but as leaders, we are trying to take people to a destination too, though. So it's a real tricky balance that I don't always hit well. Because you don't want to just like, okay, I'm going to ask this question, but really I don't care what you say because we're doing it my way. You don't want to do that either. So yeah. Dave, you got any pearls of wisdom for us before we move on to our next topic here?
The only thing I would think of, we don't sometimes think of it in terms of leadership, but our reputation, particularly by people who are outside. Okay, it's one thing I know we're all concerned about a reputation within the church and what people think, because if we don't have a reputation within the local assembly that we're shepherding, obviously we're going to have some real difficulties. But it just kind of came to mind that the Apostle Paul said that we must be well thought of by outsiders. Mm-hmm. And the reputation that, we have in the community, not that we're seen as the theologically accurate or all these other things that we like to project out, but do we have a good reputation in the community? In other words, when the community sees us, and these are people that don't come to our church and maybe never will come, mm-hmm. But do they view us as people of integrity, that they think highly of us, that if they have a question, they know that we're going to be honest with them, that we're also good company to be around, that we're not going to take advantage of them and whatnot. And I guess maybe one reason that came to mind, one, it tends to be something that is downplayed, but we're seeing that explode in a secular setting, and that is with the previous college coach and now a professional coach, Urban Meyer. And it's discovering that he does not have a good reputation in the community. It isn't just the incident in Ohio, but it's all the other stuff that has gone on. All the other stuff that has gone on since he's gotten to his current team. And then all of the other stuff that went on when he was coaching other teams.
Yeah.
Okay. Outside of the coaching, outside of the wins, outside of the losses, outside of what he was communicating to the players, but his life in the community. And that's from the secular side.
Right.
And we all know pastors or whatever that they can be people that love the word or say they love the word, but yet at the same time, they do not maintain a reputation that is well thought of by outsiders. And it seems like we never really spend any time thinking about that, putting that into our calculation. It just seems to me.
Yeah, and I think part of that is because we lose sight of what the mission is, or we lose sight of what, or we redefine success. So in order for us to be a successful pastor, we need to get to a certain number of people in the chairs or the pews. In order to be a successful businessman, you need to have, a certain, bottom line or sales or whatever you're in. And one of the things I noticed about powerful leaders is the ones who are most accomplished, they often, not always, because there's exceptions, but often they're kind of jerks, because they can just really drive and then they have to kind of run over people. I take no joy in naming names here. I mean, you mentioned one. As a Michigan fan, it doesn't matter to me that you throw Urban Meyer under the bus, but in the spiritual side, there's a podcast that Christianity Today's put out. It's called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. I don't know if you guys have listened to that or not. It's pretty fascinating. And there's a quote that the pastor of the church, who this is kind of about, he's like, man, there's a whole mountain of bodies behind our bus. Okay. And he's basically saying that, we're going to get to this. And I think that number was 50,000. We're going to get to 50,000 people in our churches across campuses. And we're just going to run you over, get on or get run over, basically. Now, on one hand, you're like, well, yeah, that's how you get this done. But what about all those bodies behind there? And I think that's what you're talking about, Dave. It's like, don't be so concerned about the success and everything. What about those people, the people who are called to minister to and care for? That's a really good point. Appreciate you sharing that. Okay, Steve,
Hey,
I'm going
to hear me.
Yeah, go for it, Josh. What?
Okay. Just two things. It was either yesterday or this morning. My wife Joy was reading something to me. I'm not sure of the source, but it was just interesting. It said that something like 60, 65, 70% of people that are, categorized as millionaires or that upper class of rich, the majority of those people did not come from money. They are people who worked their way up. They're the people who came from, poor families, stuff like that. They worked hard to get there. The other thing that was pointed out was, you got those people that are, I guess in our economy today, a millionaire is just a millionaire. It's those who are reaching the multi-millions and billions are the really rich, but that lower class of rich look rich, fancy car, fancy house, fancy clothes. But as you go up the chain, those who are really, really rich, the ones that just have that excessive amount of money, often are very common looking, very plain.
Yeah.
They drive average cars. And that's because part of the reason they're so rich is they're good with their money. And that's why they're there. The point I'm trying to make is not that we have to be poor from the beginning and not look rich, but the idea there is it's kind of the average person who is good at what he does and successful. You look at the successful people, and I'm talking a worldly leadership here, but you look at the really successful, they're hard workers.
Mm-hmm.
They're cautious to use the word humble, but they're not the ones that are flashy. They're not the ones living in the house of cards. They are kind of common people, and they live common, and yet they're still able to influence people, achieve success in certain standards. And I know biblical leadership is not the same, but the point being, not everybody's an Apostle Paul. Some of us are those names of the disciples that nobody really knows, and yet they were chosen and led and preached the word. They were faithful. And I guess it's an attribute of that humility, common. We're not above the people. We are one of the people. We have that James chapter 3, verse 1, I think it is, be not many masters, for yours is the greater condemnation. We recognize that. And yet we're just like the rest of them. We're all sheep, sinners, and in need of a savior, and just trying to serve God. So I guess just some attributes.
That's good. Thanks.
Yeah.
I think a good question to ask yourself as a leader is, what are those things that you are not willing to do? What am I not willing to do? Right? If and I'm not, please don't take this the wrong way. I'm not telling you guys, right, that when the meeting's over, you need to go clean the bathroom in your church, right, and clean the toilets. But are you willing to do that? Mm-hmm. Have you ever done it? Mm-hmm. I mean, that those are the kinds of things those are the kinds of X-ray questions that I think we sometimes need to stop and ask ourselves and think about am I willing to get my hands dirty? Am I willing to paint that wall? Am I willing to scrub that floor? Am I willing to cook that meal and serve that? Am I willing to be last in line? Mm-hmm. Those are the kind of X-ray questions I think as leaders it's healthy for us to ask ourselves and reflect on. So.
It is. Steve, so what?
I was going to say I have three quick things from Hebrews 13.
Go for it.
You guys know it. It talks about ruling, which would be, I think, like leading. And typically, when it talks about pastoral authority, like in Hebrews 13, it refers to those who have spoken the word and following their faith. And then down to verse 7, I think it is, they care for your souls. So those three things we rule by or lead by. It's not our authority as much as we have the authority of the Word of God, and a lot of what we do, it's not. You have to do it because I say so, but it's thus says the Lord. And then it's our example. At least you referred to that. This is what I do. Works for me. And then our actions have to be. Because I'm doing this because I care for your soul. I'm doing this because I love you.
Yeah, that's good. That's just good stuff there.
Well, it's Bible, so I'm safe.
That's a safe spot to be. So yeah.
What he meant to say is it's the Bible, so I know I'm right. That's what he was wanting to say.
Yeah. A lot of people quote the Bible.
I may have said that to Josh a time or two.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So Steve, the next, this is just part of just trying to get acquainted with each other a little bit. What are your hobbies? And then we'll throw it out to anyone else after this too. But what do you like to do when you're not working other than doing backflips?
I don't do back. I only do front.
Yeah, and how did you? And then tell me the story of that. Like, how did, like, just one day did you wake up and like, I want to do a flip, or like?
Oh, I've been doing them as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not a hobby.
Well, I know it's not a hobby, but I mean, I can't do that. I mean, I saw that your wife posted that on Facebook, and I was like, okay, I'm impressed. Yeah, because So
there was a 5-year gap between them, but now I do them more regularly. Just I don't know why.
That was a half decade of silence, right?
Yeah, a lot of it is to impress my wife.
Well, I would be impressed. I'm
Well, he's
doing
not
well
asking
just
you
to be
to
able
marry
to
him,
walk
so.
from one room to the other, so.
So you've been doing this from the time you were a
As
kid,
long as I can remember, grade school.
grade
Yeah.
school.
I
Just like,
used to be able to do backflips, but that's been a long time.
okay, all right.
I don't know.
So you do these.
I don't really get a lot of pleasure out of it. But for hobbies, I garden.
Yep.
And I take care of the property here. I love to fish. Hunting is okay, but I'd rather fish. I read. That's kind of what I do. Josh, do I do anything else?
Well, don't you do some
No.
baking too? I think
Do I do what?
don't you do some baking or something too? Like, don't I see you doing stuff with
I
that?
have.
Okay.
I enjoy grilling. I enjoy cooking outside. But normally my baking is for our annual men's pie baking contest.
Maybe that's what I saw.
That's could be.
Did you win?
Well, I should have. I got runner up in 2 categories.
Oh, there's multiple categories. So what
Oh
are the
yeah.
categories?
This is a big deal.
Yeah, I can tell. What are the categories real quick?
It's prettiest, best overall, best tasting, most unusual, and there's probably one more in there, one more category.
All right. Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Scott, you I know you enjoy racing and things like that. So how does that work out into your hobby life? And I know it also crosses into some ministry as well. But then other than that, what else do you enjoy doing?
Well, used to do a lot of sports, but once the racing thing really took over, I had to sit there and say, okay, costs, I can't continue to afford all these. So I had to, golf clubs went out the window, the new glove and bat for softball went out, all that stuff went, fishing. If I go fishing with my dad, it's I hope you got equipment because I whatever, I do a fishing retreat normally every year and speak at that, but it's not because of my fishing capabilities, that's for sure. But so I kind of pared it all down just the one hobby, just because expense of it. Yeah. But being out of the racetrack and, like right now, I was supposed to be heading to West Salem because we have our big end of the year show where they run tonight through Sunday. And it's a 4-day thing. And my son's supposed to run 3 of the 4 nights, 3 of the 4 days. He just won't run Sunday, but when we have our chapel service out there. But, and Dad's preaching this year, so I'll be here. Last year, we were shut down because of our parking lot being tore up. And so I actually live streamed our service from the Victory Lane at the fairgrounds there in West Salem last year. So it's kind of a fun hobby. I normally get behind the wheel maybe once a year for our annual Faster Pastor race we do up there for the fundraiser for the Agape Center there in La Crosse. But pretty much that's my hobbies. Or in the sports end of it now, I ref basketball or I refed a volleyball match on Tuesday night over in Wapaka, so I just kind of stay busy in the sports on that end.
Oh, okay. Now, are you kind of a gearhead in terms of, do you enjoy turning wrenches and getting under the hood and stuff like that, or do you prefer to be more of a driver?
Everybody else around me prefers me just to be the driver, and so it was funny because when I actually got started in the church in Reedsburg, we did a lot of build our own motors and everything else, and we had too many guys in my church that were on my race crew that all thought they were the master mechanic. And, one guy would come in and set the valves and leave, and another guy would come in and change the valves. And then I'd sit there and say, okay, well, that's not the specs I was told when we were putting this thing together. And we get to the track and I get black flagged. And so then, we had to do everything we could to keep from throwing wrenches to each other. So it's like, okay, everybody has their job and we kind of specialize that. But I just kind of, like my son's car, I'll go out there, maybe set tire pressures and, stagger and stuff like that with the tires. But they'll keep me out from underneath the hood.
Okay. All right. All right. Hey, Dave Krishner, what's some things you like to do for your hobbies?
I used to have quite a few of them. A lot of them have
Theme here.
fallen. Huh?
I'm sensing a theme here.
Yeah, a lot of them have fallen away over time, as I guess I've gotten distracted by things. I used to like picture taking a lot.
Oh,
I do a little bit of it, not a whole lot anymore. Reading is a very big thing for me. I enjoy playing around with Bible software. And that kind of thing. I used to like to just go out for drives. Sometimes that's the way I would clear my head, and sometimes it's still the way. I just go out and drive an hour one way and drive an hour back, another way. And where did I go? What did I do? Nothing, but other than, it was a way of getting out and away. The scenery's changed.
Yep.
I don't have anybody yakking in my ear.
Yep.
Type of thing. And so, some of those types of things.
Yeah. So you mentioned Bible software. Tinker that. Which Bible software do you like and use, or do you use multiple ones?
I use multiple ones. I use Logos and Accordance.
Oh, sure. Do you have a preference?
And yeah, Logos is kind of like almost like a Mac truck, and sometimes it is very complicated to accomplish what you want to accomplish, and I forget, and I've got to go back and look up stuff. Accordance is much simpler and faster, and it doesn't have as many resources, but it gets to the original languages and other things much quicker for analysis. It kind of reminds me of the old Mac PC debate that goes on. Do I want a PC or do I want a Mac, an Apple system? And I find this true among those two software programs as well as the PC. When I first started to get a computer, it was in the late 90s, late 80s. It was in the late 80s that I got a computer, and this was when CompUSA was around and a whole bunch of other computer stores, right? And at that time, I was working on my master's in business administration. And so and before this, I was using a typewriter. In fact, I was using an old Royal Underwood metal thing. And my hands would hurt after about 20 pages of typing. And it was very slow and methodical. But anyway, I went there and I said, here's what I am. I'm married. I'm going to school at night. I work full time in a job. I don't want to have to read a 300-page manual to make it work. Point me to the right computer. They said, go see Mac, go see Apple. Literally is what they told me. I said, okay, that'll work. And so I went over to the Apple store. And at that time, we were babysitting and house sitting some kid who was in about fourth grade. And I get this thing and I bring it home. I start bringing the boxes in, and he looks at it. He goes, oh, we've got those at school. Here, let me set it up for you. And, it was so easy a fourth grader could do it. And I said, no, we'll go through this a step at a time. But kind of since then, I've, had that. I've had PCs in the past. I'm back to the Mac again, but I have owned PCs in the past. And so I find that kind of between the two of them, between Logos and Accordance. Accordance is simpler, cleaner interface and that kind of thing to run. Logos is more like the Mac truck.
Okay.
And it has many more resources in it. And I've got a ton of resources in it. So I use them both.
Yeah, I have Logos on my Mac. I have Logos, and I always feel like I've got this Ferrari that I'm in first gear going down the road, and I'm like, I know this thing can go a lot faster than 10 miles an hour, but I don't know how to get it out of first gear in some ways. That's kind of how I feel, and I've tried to learn and stuff like that. So I definitely hear what you're saying there. So yeah. So Josh, what about some hobbies for you? What do you like to do?
Yeah, that's I'd say one of my favorite hobbies is going on walks. Uh, get out, smell the fresh air. I love taking some of my kids with me one on one and getting to knowing them a little bit better. Um, I am a closet political junkie. Um, I don't put signs out in my front yard because I don't want to discourage anybody from coming to our church based on my political stint, but on the inside, I love following politics and getting hot under the collar and foaming at the mouth a little bit. And then I guess my real hobby is messing with coffee, roasting beans, grinding beans, making good cups of coffee, and I absolutely love collecting mugs. So I definitely have a problem. I've collected mugs and I ran out of space in my house, so I started bringing them to our church services so we can drink coffee out of mugs. And one of the ladies that often cleans dishes came to my wife and said, "Can you guys stop bringing so many mugs?" So I love going to thrift stores and looking for mugs with odd, weird stuff on it, collecting them and putting them all over the house. So,
Cool.
yeah.
Oh, cool. Awesome. What about you, Dave? Lingle, what's a hobby that you like to do?
I'm kind of in that used to camp. I actually used to be a pretty avid collector of United States stamps. Actually have a fairly relatively impressive
I did not know that.
collection still. And I'm probably more of an accumulator these days, but yeah, I don't. I tell you, as you get older, and maybe Brother Steve, maybe Brother Christian, a little bit. You get older, you kind of, some things you used to really enjoy kind of go by the wayside a little bit. Partly because, like in my case, we've got grandkids that live close, and they take a certain amount of our spare time, which is good. We love it. And I wouldn't trade time with them for anything truly. So I guess in one sense, my grandkids are not a hobby, but it's just like tonight they'll be coming over and staying overnight. They don't have school today or tomorrow, and so a certain amount of flex time, so to speak. That's it goes to them. We enjoy riding our motorcycle. We did a trip. We did the rest of a trip this summer. We back in 2019, we actually rode the bike along with Fafi's. Some of you know Corey and Lori Fafi, and then some other friends, the Seegers, Mike and Donna Seeger. They drove a car. In 2019, we rode around the upper shore of Lake Superior. It was an amazing trip. And then this summer, in August, we actually rode the bikes up to Marquette, started in Marquette and worked our way west, did the southern shore, completed the circle of Lake Superior, did the southern shore of Lake Superior, again with Fafi's and Seegers, and just had a great time. We've ridden the bike out to, again with Fafi's and Seegers, we've gone out to Mount Rushmore, ridden the bike out there. Us and Fafi's have ridden our bikes down to North Carolina, down to Branson area. So we've done a number of trips together over the years. More recently, I kind of been lacking a certain amount of energy, but found out that it probably wasn't really due to old age. It's due to this heart condition I have, which Lord willing will be corrected at the end of this month. And hopefully that'll restore some level of energy that has been lacking for some time now. And we'll be a little more, we'll feel more like doing some other things, but yeah, so
very cool.
Just being involved in ministry and work related things, that as you all know, takes up a lot of time. So
it does. What type of bike do you have?
Currently we have a Yamaha Roadstar Silverado 1700, and it's a fairly comfortable bike. We're actually talking about maybe training it in and getting a trike,
okay.
Which would be a little more comfortable for Judy, I think. And you know, again, you get older. I love my Twin V.
Yeah.
Yamaha. I love the Twin V. I love the 2-wheeler, but you know, a trike would be a little more stable and still get the open road and the open air. So
yeah, totally get it. That's good. All right, our time is coming to a close here. I have two things real quickly here, so we'll answer these quickly because we want to spend a lot of time on it. But number one, just okay, of the main areas of, and this is more towards pastoral leadership, but we have pastors. They need to be involved in administration. They need to be involved in the preaching / teaching. We'll put those together. Counseling, shepherding. These are some big categories, see buckets, okay, of kind of responsibilities that we'd have. And there's probably others, but we'll just leave it to those four. So administration, teaching, preaching, counseling, and shepherding. Which of those do you think pastors, in your experience, maybe for you personally or for your network of friends, which of those four do you think that pastors would want the most help in and encouragement in? So that's administration, that's preaching, teaching, counseling, and shepherding. Does that make sense what I'm asking? So of those four buckets, which, maybe it's you, maybe it's your network, would think that that's something that they would need more encouragement, resources, or whatever. And any thoughts on that?
My opinion would be not identifying which one, but how do you balance the four? That's probably because I tended, when I was full-time pastor, I tended to focus on what I enjoyed the most. And I think finding the balance is the hard part.
Yeah. It's a good point. Good point. Yeah. Someone else. Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, I know for me personally, the top one is administration. God definitely chose the least capable to do this job. And he often receives the glory because I certainly am not worthy of any of it when it comes to administration. But, you know, here I am, and it's part of my calling is to administrate a body of believers. So I'd say personally for me, that one, I would say my conviction is overall, it's not just preaching and teaching, it's what we're preaching and what we're teaching. And there's so much temptation to get into all kinds of distractions and variations and current events. And man, we've got to stick to the word of God and preach the hard truths. You got to love people with truth. Hebrews chapter 12 says, if I discipline you, it's because I love you. And if I don't discipline you, then you're not my child. And discipline isn't always a spanking or timeout. It's working hard to perfect what's not natural to us. And when it comes to preaching and teaching, it's so easy to just hand out a carton of milk. What's really hard is to give them the truth, and that which they don't want to hear and you don't want to say. Yet we got to do that and do it in a very loving way that they know they're being given the truth. So
yeah,
what a challenge for all of us.
Good. Scott,
Yeah.
what do you think?
You know, as you go through, I think the frustrating thing is, in the ministry for 25 years is the, the balance, but balancing what is seen from what is not seen. Behind the scenes, pastor, you come into a church that's had a huge counseling ministry. Okay, so everybody's the key words in counseling and that's a big, catchphrase and that, or preaching, teaching, and administrative, all these things. But in reality, the prep time behind the preaching, teaching, the prep time behind the shepherding. If we're not prepared when we go to care for that couple or that individual that lost their spouse, or if we're not, prayed up, if we're not, planned out, a lot of people in administration that, you talk about, okay, what does the calendar look like? What all the planning behind the scenes for the next 3 months, let alone next year. And there's a lot of behind the scenes that go on that just continue to get tools there. And we talked about, different software and stuff like that can help us. But, like the Bible software, there's also all kinds of administrative, software too, that we got to continue to, pass around to each other and, kind of give us insight and, I think those are good reminders, and continue to remind each other about our requirement. If we're not praying for our people, we have no business standing before our people and preaching to them, or going and shepherding them. We got to pray before we even get there. And so it's a constant battle.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah, that's helpful. Hey, Dave Kirshner, what about you and your experience personally or with your network, these administration, the counseling, the shepherding, the preaching, teaching, where do you think pastors would need the most encouragement in?
I would think, or based on what I've seen, I've seen pastors and myself have strengths in one area or another area, and weaknesses in other areas. And so I think it largely depends upon the person and the ministry that they have. I don't think there is any one particular area other than communicating God's word with love. Okay. Not just communicating, and not just communicating God's word, but communicating it with brokenness, with love, to where it's not a clinical dissertation. Okay. Because we can quote enough people, Jamison, Fawcett Brown, etc., Warren Worsby, etc., pick whoever your favorites are. We can go back to the resources, and even when we've written our papers and stuff and quoted theologians out of the 15th century, to where people have come to a lecture, but rather taking the truth of the word, and somehow in conveying it, we convey it to the people with brokenness and with love. Okay. There are plenty of books out there. Spurgeon wrote, Lectures to My Students.
Right.
That he talks about, proper way for communication, how pastors should do things.
Mm-hmm.
And, I learned a lot of that kind of on my own in small country churches. Okay. As far as the preaching job goes, like preaching to a congregation, a magnificent congregation of 8 people that were in this great big church that they all sat at the back,
Of
on
course.
the very back row, and the ambient light was blue due to their age and the color of their hair. Okay. And they wanted me up in the pulpit, not down on the floor. Okay. And they had difficulty hearing, and they had no sound system. Okay. And all of a sudden I began to learn in very practical ways how to communicate, but it wasn't just learning the projection and all of the other stuff that goes with it, but learning to communicate with brokenness and love, the Word of God. And what was interesting, over a period of time, they began to move forward in the pews after they chased me back up into the pulpit. Because I go, okay, you're going to be back there. I'll come back there with you. And but learning to do that, and I think it has to do somewhat with what Jesus said, talking to Peter, when he goes, feed my sheep. He didn't say corral them. He didn't say perform for my sheep, or anything. He just says, feed my sheep. Yeah. And then he comes back again to Peter again. I don't think you got it, guy. Feed my sheep. And he comes back. I still don't think you got it. Feed my sheep. And I think that's probably the area, and that ties a little bit in with all of them, but we usually don't approach it from that perspective of coming before them with brokenness and love for them. Okay. And I remember being in one church one time, and the people were asking me how I liked it there. And I listened to them very carefully, and they kept asking me, how I liked the community and how I liked this and that and the other, because it was a completely new environment for me. And I just looked at them and I said, what you're asking me is, do I love you? It just kind of stopped them. And I said, yes, I love you. I'm glad I'm here and I love you. And I said, but now some of you are thinking, oh, great, the pastor loves us, but he has to. Bible says so. And I just looked at him and I said, you know what? Even more than that, I really like you. I want to be around you. And that kind of took all of that in that way. And so I think as pastors and whatnot, we've got that, Jesus didn't tell Peter to beat the sheep, keep the sheep in line. He didn't tell him to counsel them till he was blue in the face. He was feed them.
Yeah.
Be with them, and all that involves. And I think that's really in the area, and I see a lot of stuff anyway. I don't know about the others, but I see a lot of stuff that's just tied into the technical, cold, bureaucratic ways.
Okay.
That's my 2 cents.
Well, I appreciate that. So
Probably.
Dave Lingo, you have a wider pool. I mean, because you're in several churches, lots of different pastors and things like that with your ministry and stuff like that. Same question to you, but let me phrase it in a slightly different way. What do you think, where do you hear pastors express the most frustration? Is it in the preaching realm? Is it in the administration realm, the counseling realm, the shepherding realm? Other than trying to have the part-time job of following pandemic protocols, where do you see pastors expressing the most frustration? Is it related more towards pastoring, or excuse me, shepherding, counseling, preaching, or administration?
Probably, excuse me, probably because of the work that we do. What I probably hear most often is challenges related to shepherding, but specifically as it relates to shepherding congregations where there is division over political issues. So, yeah, I mean, I hate to bring it up, but in point of fact, like mask versus no mask, right? Or even vaccine versus no vaccine.
Yeah.
And I don't, it doesn't matter what church you're in. It doesn't matter if you're independent fundamental Baptist. It doesn't matter if you're more on the new evangelical scale, but still solidly evangelical. It doesn't matter. Every pastor is dealing with the divisiveness that's in our culture. And they're, to some degree, they're fighting it in their churches. And from Dave's perspective, I think it comes back to people need to understand. We need to, Ephesians says, literally, we need to forbear. Mm-hmm. The word is I think it's on echo. It if you translate it literally, it would be put up with, right? We need to learn how to put up with each other in love. That means we tolerate the fact that there are differences, right? And so I think there's a lack of spiritual maturity that certainly division doesn't come. That's not a product of. It's not a fruit of the Spirit, right? It's God's Spirit doesn't produce division, but that's one of the greatest challenges today, I think, that pastors are dealing with, is just the animus and the political strife and division that exists in the greater culture. It is impacting the churches. I'll bet every one of you guys would say, yeah, I'm dealing with that, or I have dealt with it. So
yeah, we just had a family leave the church, this is last weekend. So yeah, definitely. Then we're adding some too. So, praise God for that. But yeah, so anyway, yeah, that is helpful. Okay, let's end on a high note here. So just real quickly here, is we want to spend a lot of time on this, but here's my last thing is I'd just like us to share what about God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, the Godhead, or it could be an attribute or something that your mind, your soul often goes to to find encouragement. So for me, by way of illustration, God's patience with me helps me be patient. Now, I'm not always patient, of course. This is not a victory lap here, but this is that's the characteristic about God that I find very encouraging to me personally, and it gives me fuel for ministry. So I guess what comes to your mind, and we don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but what comes to your mind when we say, okay, what about God has been encouraging to you recently, or something that it just keeps coming back to throughout your ministry and your life that has been life-giving and encouraging? We'll start with the state shepherd, Steve.
Okay. It's God's care about me and about every detail of my life. I go back to the couple verses about birds, about are you not much more of much more value than sparrows? It's not just that God in his omniscience is aware that a sparrow has fallen. I mean, he has to know it, but it said he cares. There's a psalm that says that he knows the birds of the mountains. It's not just, again, that he's aware that it's like each bird.
Yeah.
He understands them. And then it gives me hope that, well, he cares about me. Mm-hmm. And I frequently go back and am comforted by his care of
Good.
all my minor problems, and I'm comfortable casting them all on him.
Thanks. That's great. What about you, Scott?
It just, when I think about even when I went into the head pastorate in Reedsburg, I was all wrong. I never desired to be the lead man, if you would. I was assistant for a number of years at different ministries and working in school administration, and that's where I was perfectly content. And when my name was put in, I was like, okay, I'm not exactly sure why and how this is going to work. But when the calling came, and even the calling here at Stevens Point, to know it was God doing it. It wasn't me orchestrating and if God's the one that saw fit to put me here, he's the one that's going to continue to work through it. And I just content in knowing that he has it already worked out.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that I can trust him and as long as I stick close to him and his word and I seek him every day, it's a good place to be in. And it's a humbling place to saying, okay, I feel totally inadequate, but it's the place that I need to be in. And, I know the rest of you guys with your vast background knowledge and everything else, you came into it with all the answers. And I say, okay, God, this is what you got. You know what you got with me. And you saw fit to put me here anyways. And so every day starting out that place and humbly bowing before him and saying, okay, I need you today like I did yesterday. And just staying there.
It's good. Yeah, God's so good. Josh, what about you?
From early on when I came to know Christ, not only from when I became aware of him, but when I actually came to know him, I've always thought of Jesus as my rock. It's in the craziness, things going right and left and up and down. Sometimes it's exciting, sometimes it's boring. Jesus has always been the same to me, which I guess his attribute then would be immutability. He doesn't change. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And for me, that's what I need. I need an anchor, something dependable, something that I can go to. I already know the answer, but I'm still going to go to him because I know the answer I'm going to get, and I need to hear it.
Right.
So that's I'd say in the 25 some odd years that I've been a believer, and I cling to that a lot.
Great. He is our rock, unchangeable.
Yeah.
That verse was in the front of my church as a kid growing up. The church I grew up going to was Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and forever. So that's always in the front. Yeah, that's cool. What about you, Dave Lingle? What about you? What part about God?
Actually, I hope this isn't a trigger for any of you, but Judy and I just last month or so finished reading a 700-page book on Providence by John Piper.
Yeah.
And it was actually an incredible read, to be honest. But, the whole point is that there is absolutely nothing that happens that is outside of God's purview, let alone God's control. And
good.
Oftentimes, I think we don't necessarily like some of the things that happen, right? I think of a close friend whose husband was killed in a car accident just days before Christmas this last year, leaving her a young widow with 3 young children. And that's just devastating.
Yeah.
But, we have to believe in God's providence. I mean, first of all, it's clearly taught in Scripture, but secondly, it does bring great comfort in knowing that, okay, I do not understand God's providence, but I can trust his providence because he is a good God.
Yeah.
And, Romans 8:28 is still in the book. And we have to be careful quoting that in those kind of circumstances because it becomes cliche, but it's still true.
Yeah.
God does work all things together for good because he is a good God. and because he is in control. And the fact that he is in control can give us great confidence, especially in this day and age where we tend to look at a world that seems to be spinning more and more out of control.
Yeah.
No, God's got this. God's got this. We just need to be faithful to what God has given us to do.
Indeed. Well, kudos to you for reading that book, man. I have it. I've referenced it. I will read it, but I have not read the whole thing yet. But
small bites.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Exactly. All right, Dave Kushner, you get the last word. So,
Okay.
And then
I would say something similar to what Dave Lingle said. Providence and provision. Tie it into that grace with that. Piper has been helpful to me in seeing God's grace in this way, along with the providence and provision, is he pictures God's grace as a river that is flowing. And we are standing in one place, and God's grace just keeps flowing. And the grace that we need 5 minutes from now is already flowing to us and will arrive in 5 minutes when we need it. So in other words, we'll disconnect from this meeting, and 5 minutes from now, none of us know what we're going to be facing. But God's provision and his grace is already there to meet us at that point.
Yeah.
And so as I think of that imagery of a river and that the water is just flowing, because I've stood in some rivers and streams and just had it flow around me, that picture of God's grace is doing that. And that what I need 5 minutes from now is already in the stream. What I need 15 minutes from now, what I need a day from now, what I need a week from now, what I need a month from now is all going to show up at the appropriate time, because it's already there and his grace is there. And I find a great deal of comfort in there, because I've had people that I've talked to, they say, well, I'm afraid of dying. Dear believers, they say, I'm afraid of dying. And I ask them the question, I said, are you dying? And they go, well, no. I said, well, you don't need God's grace for dying. Okay, because you're not dying. When that time comes,
right,
God will be there with his grace, and you've got nothing to worry about.
Yeah. For the occasion. Yeah.
It's there for the occasion. And I think, as others have expressed, we look at the situation in the world around us, the political situation, we look at the social situation. We look at all of these things, and people in our culture are coming unglued.
Yeah.
Because they are anxious, they are worried, they are stressed, because they know things are not, quote unquote, normal. But what we have is we've got the hope of God's providence and provision with his grace that comes at the right moment. And so we can stand and we know it's going to be okay. Yeah. And I think sometimes that's a lesson I have to keep learning over and over and over again, because I forget it. I know it in my head, but I forget it in my heart. Yeah. Okay. That all of a sudden something happens. And so, again, while I don't necessarily agree 100% with everything that Piper writes, he has been very helpful in that area. He is very helpful in that idea of future grace that he wrote a book about, that there's this river that is just flowing and it just envelops you and it just keeps coming and it just keeps coming. And that grace that you need for 5 minutes from now is already on its way and will arrive in 5 minutes.
And at the perfect time, the exact perfect time. Yeah.
At the exact perfect time.
That's cool. Yeah.
So
awesome. Well, hey, this has been a great conversation. It's gone a little bit longer than I said, but that's okay. We covered some really good stuff here. Let me just encourage you to pray for each other. And before we move on our day, take just a second and pray for each other. But thanks for being part of this conversation today. And we do this first Thursday of every month, for the next several months. And so it's been great. So thanks for your participation. And you guys have a great day.